and welcome back to Empower Your Menopause, a podcast for all things around the menopause transition from peri to postmenopause. I'm Coach James, and as usual with me, I have my amazing coaching partner, Juli Madacey. And today we're going to dive into a topic that many women in midlife struggle with, but often don't talk about, and that's emotional eating. So whether it's stress or boredom, or just that irresistible call of the cookie or biscuit jar, emotional eating can feel like a frustrating, never-ending cycle, especially at a time of life when our bodies don't react to foods and particularly treats like they might have done when we were younger. So in this episode, we're going to explore why emotional eating happens during menopause, what are the kind of triggers for it biologically, emotionally, what's actually making this happen, and then we'll talk about some practical strategies to try and regain some control maybe over the emotional eating. And of course, we're going to do it all without judgment as ever, because let's face it, we've all been there. I'm not sure about you, Julie, but I reach for the cookie jar just as much as the next person.
Yep.
I suppose the thing to talk about first here is to actually just add a little bit of normality to this, because emotional eating is more likely to happen during menopause anyway, because of some of those hormonal changes that take place. So it is really often not just about you or where your thought process or where your emotions are at this particular time, but sometimes due to the physicality of the changes that are taking place. So you're really not imagining it, and it's not all about a lack of willpower either. So I suppose really then, let's start off by Julie. I wonder if you could just explain to people something about the hormonal shifts and why emotional eating is actually such a challenge at this time of life for many of the people that we see in Fabulous Beyond 40.
Sure. And this is a really normal thing. I don't think we can emphasize that enough, because a lot of times we feel like, oh, everybody else has got it under control. Why can't I?
Sure.
And the truth is, no, they don't. No, they don't. Because I can attest to that personally. And as James said, we're human too. And I've been through I'm on the other side now. I'm in postmenopause, but I still have those days where it's like, I must eat the thing. So our hormones are shifting. So estrogen is fluctuating all over the place, especially in perimenopause. Um, and we have more stress, so cortisol levels are rising, and these things can cause us to have more cravings and just more emotional sensitivity, because they influence our moods greatly. And as kids, we're taught that food has power, right? If we fall down and skin our knee, and mom gives us a cookie to make us feel better, and our brains already know that cookies make us feel better. So there's that emotional connection in our subconscious mind as well. So when you think about all of the things that you have going on at this phase of life, maybe your kids are in their teens, and can be a difficult period. Maybe your kids are grown and you have grandkids. It really depends on that. But you've got family to think about, you've got work to think about, you've got your household, your community, all the other activities and hobbies you want to be doing, friends, and possibly caring for aging parents who might not be doing as well as others. So all of these things cause a lot of stress, and stress is a big factor when it comes to emotional eating. So it's a very common coping mechanism, and can explain why, like from a biological perspective, a little bit later. But know that it is okay, and there's nothing wrong with you if you do experience emotional eating from time to time.
Yeah. I remember some time ago I had a client, Sarah. She was about late 40s at the time, busy professional, mother of kids. She was doing all the usual stuff, juggling work deadlines, all those things you just managing the schedules for the kids, taking care of aging parents, trying to be a good partner to her other half. And she often found herself reaching for snacks late at night. And it wasn't because she was hungry, but it was probably the only point in her day when she actually had time to herself for just a few minutes.
Mhm.
And what she'd do is, just as a reaction, she'd reached for the cookie jar and a cup of tea, and before she knew it, half the packet had gone. And that led to her feeling really frustrated, guilty, out of control, all that good stuff. So we started
Sure.
working together, and she admitted that she really didn't know a lot of the time where her feelings lay around this and around food in general. And we came to the conclusion that she was just stressed and overwhelmed. So we worked on looking at some of the triggers for that happening, that end of the day exhaustion, the pressure of trying to get everything done right, and the need for some kind of comfort. And then when we'd worked through that, we talked about small manageable changes, which is what we always talk about, right, to our clients, Julie, when it comes to these kind of things.
Hmm.
First question, am I hungry or do I need something else? And she started keeping a journal on that because I always think that's a really good way to do it. If you try remembering these things, quite often, 2, 3, 4 days down the road, it's gone, right? So if you've journaled
Mm.
about it, then you can reflect back and take a look at it. And we also created this idea of a self-care menu, so she could start picking up on triggers and start looking at other things she could turn to if she needed to. So things that weren't actually food related. Because we worked out the cookies were kind of like the symptom, but they weren't the
Hmm.
actual underlying cause of things. It was just there was something there that she could grab. And then we started trying to
Right.
replace that idea of grabbing food late at night with something that was a little bit more personal and non-food related. So either taking a hot bath, watching a bit of TV, 5 minute body scan, all those kind of things. And we didn't work on this perfectly. There's still times, I'm sure today, when Sarah still turns to the cookie jar occasionally, but she does so more with compassion rather than feeling guilty about it. There's nothing worse than
Hmm.
looking over the cookie jar and diving in and sort of like furtively looking around to make sure that nobody else is looking, right? But once she
Yeah.
felt that she was more in control and she had some better coping strategies and worked out what the underlying emotion was, she actually felt more in control. And I mean, the biggest win of all those was that she didn't feel as though she needed the biscuits. It was just a moment to herself that she needed more than anything else. Once she started giving a moment to herself in other areas, then things kind of came together a bit. So that's a really nice, I think, personal example. But why
Hmm.
don't we try and talk about some of the underlying things behind this then, so we can give listeners the chance to understand a little bit more about emotional eating and why it might happen and what triggers they can look for in themselves to recognize it. So I
Sure.
guess my first question for you, Julie, is how do you know if you're eating because you're emotional, or how do you know if you're eating because it's physical? What is the difference between physical hunger and emotional hunger for you?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think it's something that a lot of us have lost touch with because we're so uh, ingrained with we have to have snacks, we don't want to get hungry as if hunger's an emergency. So we don't really remember what it's like to feel hungry and that it's actually okay to feel hungry. It's not an emergency. There's food available everywhere you turn. So, being able to get hungry is actually good for your body's balance. And when you feel those hunger pangs, it's in your stomach, which, by the way, sits just under your rib cage. It's not down lower in your belly. If
Mm.
you start to get rumbling down there, it might be gas or something else. So when where and but I mean I we joke about this, but I've talked to several people who don't really understand the difference, like never thought about where their stomach is physically located. So a lot of times, especially this time of life, our belly gets bloated and there's a lot of stuff going on down there. So we may think that that kind of noise and movement is indicates hunger, but true physical hunger starts feeling like a little bit of emptiness and it builds over time. Sometimes you can drink a glass of water, it goes away for a little while and then maybe comes back. But when you're actually physically hungry, pretty much any food will satisfy your hunger. So it doesn't necessarily matter. And I always give myself the apple test. If an apple would satisfy me at that moment in time, then I'm probably physically hungry.
Mm.
If an if an apple isn't something that I think I want, then it might be something else, and that would be emotional hunger. So emotional hunger is more driven by feelings rather than some kind of specific physical requirement. And it comes on not only does it come on suddenly, but it's very specific. So when you find yourself hungry for a very specific food, that is likely tied to some kind of emotion, and it's that emotion that's asking you for soothing. And a lot of times we stuff down our feelings that may be unpleasant by stuffing food instead of allowing ourselves to sit with that discomfort for a little bit. And a lot of times when we eat emotionally, we still don't feel satisfied. Now, some of that can be because those emotions are still there and they're unattended to. And sometimes it can be because of our food choices, because we haven't actually put any nutrition into our body
Mm,
when we eat the kinds of things we tend to want when we're emotionally hungry. So it really depends on what is triggering that and how you feel afterwards. If you've eaten for physical hunger, you usually feel pretty good. You feel satisfied. But when you've eaten for emotional hunger, you might feel guilty or ashamed
mm,
instead.
yeah. I suppose when we talk about the triggers as well, it's important to say that it's easy to get embroiled in this idea that the emotions around emotional eating always have to be negative ones. Yes, stress, boredom, sadness, loneliness, all those things we talked about. But you even get emotional eating at things like celebrations as well. You're at a birthday and there's a big piece of birthday cake there, and we tuck into it because we're feeling emotional about the thing, and we associate those good feelings with cake as well as sort of like the cookie jar that our mum gives us, or the cookie from the cookie jar that our mum gives us when we fall over. So I think it's important to recognise as well that these are not always embroiled, or emotional eating is not always embroiled in
Mhm.
negativity or negative emotions. One of the things that I find, and I'm not sure whether you agree or not, is that reward after emotional eating or after a bout of it is often short-lived. What are your thoughts
Mhm.
on that?
Yeah, it is short-lived because we haven't satisfied our true need. And I just want to explain a little bit about the physiology of emotional eating because we don't eat because there's something wrong with us, because we lack willpower, because we're weak. We're trying to solve a problem. And we reach for food because we have learned, as I said in the cookie example, when you skinned your knee as a child, we've learned that food can solve our problems because of our society, the way we're raised, where the commercials we're bombarded with. But there is actually a network of nerves that go behind our ear and behind our jaw called the trigeminal nerve. And that nerve stimulates dopamine production in our body. So it when animals are stressed, they chew on things. When babies are stressed, they put things in their mouths. We don't really get over that as adults. And so the process of chewing actually stimulates that trigeminal nerve and it produces those feel good chemicals, neurochemicals and hormones in our body. So it does create that temporary stress relief. So we learn that habit because we have the emotion or the stress, and that leads us to eating for comfort. We might get some relief, and then we have guilt or frustration because we haven't satisfied the emotional need. And then that gets itself into kind of a vicious cycle. And it can become very frustrating because it can feel like it's difficult to break out of. But the good news is it can be done.
Yeah. Before we go on to the ways that it can be done, then, because we like to follow a format here, don't we? Pull things apart a little bit, talk about it, and then talk about some of the ways
Yeah.
that people can address the issues. So I just want to delve a little bit more into something that we touched on earlier about why it's actually harder in midlife when it comes
Mhm.
to emotional eating. And once again, I think important to just keep hammering up home this idea of just normalizing this idea of emotional eating. It does
Mhm.
happen. And it happens even more so at this time because midlife and all the things that can happen during this period of time will amplify any emotional eating that we have for various biological, psychological, and lifestyle reasons. So you talked before about those hormonal shifts that intensify cravings. We talked about estrogen decline, particularly during perimenopause when it's fluctuating, and then declining during menopause or postmenopause. And estrogen plays a role in serotonin production as well. That's a feel-good neurotransmitter. So when we've got lower levels of estrogen, we often find that we have those mood dips that are associated with the menopause transition, and that can drive emotional eating. We've got the cortisol as well, stress levels. We talk about this all the time, don't we? Stress being the mortal enemy of women in perimenopause and the menopause transition. That often
Yeah.
increases during midlife. Uh, there's the concept of as estrogen declines, the other place estrogen tends to come from when it stops coming from the ovaries is from your adrenal glands. If you're super stressed, then you're not producing estrogen. Cortisol spikes. Cortisol tends to drive cravings. You've got this whole thing going on there. And one thing we didn't touch on before is also, of course, the fact that we become more insulin resistant as we get older, which can
Mhm.
also emphasize cravings and our want for sweets, sugary type snacks as well. So you've got all that going on. You have got this idea of being in the sandwich generation where you're the meat in a sandwich between your kids and your parents somewhat, aren't you? That drives all kinds of
Yeah.
stresses going on. I know in our household at the moment, both my wife and I have got parents who are getting older, need more care from us. Um, our kids, twin daughters, 14, hyper hormonal at the moment. Laura's bang smack in the middle of this whole period as well. So there's a heck of a lot going on for women at this time of life.
Sure.
And then, of course, when you've got kids that are a bit older, you've got all kinds of other life transitions that take place. Yeah, your kids might be leaving home. You might suddenly become an empty nester. You worry more about them when they start going on a backpacking journey around the world, and you can't see them because they're off dancing to the full moon on a beach in Thailand. You've got all those stresses. You've got career shifts, relationships change and mature at this time of life. So there's lots of things going on there from an emotional point of view as well. But then, of course, our good old friend sleep. You know, we
Yeah.
know that sleep becomes harder during the menopause transition. You've got night sweats, you've got insomnia, you've got restless sleep. All that kind of stuff leads to fatigue. Fatigue tends to lower our willpower when it comes to things like whether we want to eat or not and what we want to eat. But also physically, hormones as well. Things like ghrelin, your hunger hormone, and leptin, the one that makes you feel full. So all those kind of imbalances there that come from the sleep issue can also lead to cravings for sugary or high carb foods. And then we talked before about the decades of conditioning. That idea, mum gives us a cookie, and we need to face facts, really, don't we? That you get to an age and you're less resilient. When you're a kid, when you were younger and full of the joys of youth, you could bounce around at 20. I know, my girls go through all kinds of sort of like sweets, cookies, as well as the healthy food that we give them, but they just burn it off in seconds, right? So,
Mhm.
we've got all those changes as well. So I think we've probably tapped that off now, sort of like some of the reasons why this happened and understanding it and actually being kind to ourselves when we talk about it, because it is a challenge that is it's not just a lack of willpower. There's lots of other things going on as well. So let's talk then, Julie, about how people can break the cycle. I wonder what thoughts you've got here about a couple of tips and tricks that people could start to use to think about when it comes to emotional eating and whether they are emotional eating or not, and what we can do about it, I guess.
Sure. Well, and I can share some things that worked for me because this was a real battle for me for a long time. One of the things I find most helpful for not only myself, but also clients is the idea of being more mindful. So, tuning in with our body before we go for the food, think about what is it I'm feeling right now? What is it that I really need? You can ask yourself that question. And this isn't going to be a one and done kind of thing. This is a skill that takes a lot of practice because a lot of times as I said before, it's difficult for us to tune in and actually express what we're feeling at the time or recognize what it is. So checking in whether you're truly hungry or if there's something else going on. Even putting your hand over your stomach and asking it, "Am I hungry? Do you want food right now?" I know that may sound a little weird, but it actually will help you pay more attention to what's going on in your body. And then when you do decide to eat something, maybe keep a little bit of a journal to see what's going on and what is it that I was craving and what did I eat. If you decide to eat, make it a conscious choice and then give yourself permission and eat it slowly and mindfully. That's the hardest part. A lot of times we just shovel it in and then don't even remember having finished it. So if you sit down and actually eat and taste it and chew it and pay attention to the color, the smell, the texture, the taste, you'll feel a lot more satisfied and often with less of whatever it is
Mm.
by the time you've finished. I think mindfulness is a huge skill that we could all do a little better, really.
100%.
Yeah. And then we don't have to get rid of all our favorite foods. I think that is a big mistake. People say, I just absolutely can't have it. If it's something that you absolutely can't control yourself around, but you hate the idea of giving it up, maybe only have it when you go out where the portions are controlled, and you can have it in a situation where you're feeling a little bit less emotional. And because as soon as we forbid something, that's all we can focus on, because our subconscious mind does not recognize a negative. So if you say, I don't want this, all your brain is hearing is, I want this, I want this.
Must not eat the
So,
cookie. Must
so
not eat the cookie. Must eat the cookie.
yeah, exactly, exactly. It's that the little gremlin in there that's doing it. Just recognize that food isn't the enemy, and food doesn't have power over you. You get to choose. So when you decide to take some steps forward, just take small steps. Don't expect yourself to get this all perfect, because it never is. I still indulge in my comfort foods from time to time, as I'm sure do you. And give yourself that space to do it, but make it a more conscious decision, and just work at this one step at a time. I think
Mm.
that's the biggest thing you can do is
Yeah,
small
absolutely.
changes.
And then I suppose going back to Sarah, the lady I was talking about before, finding alternatives to food for comfort. So, can you think of something else that might work? Do you actually just need some time to yourself? Do you need a few minutes to yourself rather than some food? So, could you do some journaling or go for a walk or maybe some deep breathing, have a chat with a friend, something along those ideas, and just ask yourself that question again. Are you hungry? And if I'm not really hungry, do I need to do something else to fill this gap? Um, and then I also think the environment is really important. The easier you
Mhm.
make it to have foods that you think don't actually serve you within your immediate environment, the more challenging it can be, right? I remember
Yeah,
working through this with another client once, and she had that typical thing. 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the office, somebody would bring out the biscuits with their 3 o'clock cup of tea, right? And it
mhm,
was often her who was bringing the biscuits out because the drawer was just sort of a desk away from her. It was easy to reach for. Once you moved the biscuits over to the other side of the office and put a fruit bowl between her and the snack drawer, she more often than not
mhm.
herself grabbed for some fruit at that time rather than grabbing for something that was either sweet or sugary or really, really carb heavy. So I think thinking about ways that you can change your environment is another good way to actually practically
Sure.
do something about this. And then really some planning. I'm a great fan of a guy called Mark Hyman. He's got a podcast as well, health
Mhm.
guru over in the US. He doesn't go anywhere without his little sort of like pack of snacks with him. A couple of sort of like things of nuts that he takes and things like that. So he's always got something close by that he can pull on that is not sweet, sugary, carb loaded. And then thinking about
Sure.
things like what you're going to do with it as a social event. How's your work week coming up? Is it stressful or not? Um, and thinking about actually just making sure that you're physically you physically feel as though you've had enough to eat as well. I think all those things
Mhm.
are really, really important. So, Julie, how can there is a mindset element here as well. So, how can listeners reframe the idea of emotional eating? We've talked a lot about trying to say, it's okay to do this, but I wonder if you could just delve into that a little bit more.
Sure. I think one of the greatest things you can do for yourself is get curious. Start looking at the food choices you're making, when those cravings may strike, how you're feeling before, during, and after eating those particular foods, and be curious about what was I feeling, where did that come from, what connection do I have to this particular food? Because most of the time there's a story there somewhere in the back of our mind. And then just be compassionate. Most of what we do on a daily basis is driven by our subconscious mind, and we've had how many years of life to establish those habits and build them into our lifestyle. So it's not going to resolve overnight. So we want to be compassionate, exercise some self-compassion instead of letting that inner bully start beating us to death. It's really important to think of the way, how would you respond to a good friend who needed some support here? Because the truth is, you are your best friend, and we need to start treating ourselves that way. So it's an easier way to get rid of the guilt that's associated with emotional eating and the judgment that goes along with that. And curiosity is an amazing thing because we can learn a lot from it. It opens our minds and takes away that sort of negativity.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start to close things up then with a bit of recapping. So I guess we've talked about a lot of the underlying reasons for why this might be happening. Emotionally, it's common, it's understandable, but it is changeable with some awareness and small steps. So hopefully people have got some strategies there to actually think about why, if and why they might be emotional eating, and what they can do about it. And as we've said many times before, you don't have to cure, in inverted commas, yourself of anything in one fell swoop. These are all challenges, and like any challenge in life, one step at a time is the way to go about it, right? So looking at things. So I think I'd invite listeners to think, if you are emotionally eating, what strategy could you look at this week? Would you want to investigate your triggers? Would you want to think about mindful eating? Are you going to devise that self-care menu that we talked about? Or are you just going to observe your habits and do a little bit of journaling around it and see where that gets you? I suppose the key thing is that you're not defined by your relationship with food. Yeah. Every step you take
Yeah.
towards breaking the cycle is one towards a healthier, happier you. Um,
Yeah.
So a couple of messages then before we go, wrapping emotional eating up. Next week, we've got another guest coming your way. We've got Laura Watts, amazing ultramarathon runner from the UK. She combines her passion with a career as a lead cabin crew for multinational airlines. So it's really hard for her to fit her self-care in around that. But she's going to come and talk to us about that. So more about what she did to feel fabulous beyond 40 rather than her emotional or time of life, but more sort of like about the positivity that she's brought to herself at this time of life, which I think is a really nice message. And then, of course,
Yeah.
Julie, we have our November offer to listeners as well.
We do. We have a very exciting opportunity for you. So this month, November, we're offering 40 free coaching sessions to women like you to help you tackle a lot of these menopause challenges head on. And whether it's emotional eating, getting enough restful sleep, or any other symptom you may be experiencing. These sessions are going to be very tailored to your specific needs, and they are completely free. It only costs you 45 minutes of your time, but the spots are filling up. So I highly recommend that you head to our website or click the link in the show notes to claim your spot. You can book with either one of us. We would love to work together with you, or you can go to freecall.fabulousbeyond40.com in case you can't see the show notes and book your appointment today, because we would love to work together with you to help you feel fabulous every step of the way.
Amazing. So thanks for that, Julie. We've been Coach James and Coach Julie, just reminding you to stay strong and stay fabulous. We'll see you next time. Take care.